Today on r/AskReddit, non-US citizens of Reddit, what do your schools teach you about the United States? I went to school in Spain. In history class, the only US relate stuff we learned was the American Revolution, the Spanish-American War, WW1, WW2, and the Cold War. How do they portray the Spanish-American War? I ask because here it is seen as the Spanish using wooden ships against our metal ones and getting steamrolled. German here. In history class, the US is really only mentioned in context of the World Wars or the Cold War, and even then the focus is on their involvements with Europe and Germany in particular. Apart from that, the discovery, and maybe a footnote about the Revolutionary War, the US barely appears, though I didn't further pursue history in my high school years, so maybe more is taught there. In English class, the civil rights movement and the American dream are popular themes to center debates around in high school, but overall there is a much greater focus on Great Britain and their former territories. Edit. Since the specifics of education in Germany aren't done on the federal level, but are largely decided by our states, I can really only speak for myself, who lives in NRW, and not the whole country. When does Germany have you start learning English? I hear other countries start learning another language early on, and I think the US should do that too. As an American, the American dream isn't all that's cracked up to be, as it's more about connections than hard work, and also luck, and most people never get rich at all. And if you ask me, I think other countries do a better job fixing many problems that the US doesn't care to fix. In the UK, it was pretty much just Columbus and Martin Luther King. Guess the curriculum gets a shake up every now and again. GCSEs 2002-2002, I pretty much got WW1, Wall Street Crash, WW2, Cold War and Vietnam. Everything was focused on 20th century conflicts and nothing really on the civil side. Edit. I meant the Great Depression, not just the Wall Street Crash, although that was my abiding memory from those lessons. Edit 2. It's refreshing to see how many classes, since my time, include the civil rights movement, rather than covering just the wars. And Columbus isn't even about the USA at all. Geez, y'all didn't cover the American Revolution. This is what I remember. 1. 2. Spanish-American and eventual Philippine-American War. They promised us independence and liberation from the Spanish to fight with them in the Spanish-American War. When the Philippines declared independence, they fought a war to keep the Philippines Filipino-American War because they had purchased us through the Treaty of Paris. 3. They brought in the first American teachers. 4. WW2. They held out for a few months with our Filipino soldiers and were also in the Bataan Death March. General. Fun fact. 1, 2, 3, 4. Liberated us from Japan. Finally gave us independence. Western. Added. Kinda funny how out of all the things you cover, it's Manifest Destiny. Edit. Just to clarify, it seems I had a unique experience with this. It seems like it got covered better in other places. But still, I'm not saying we didn't learn about it at all. About the revolution, MLK, and how they ducked up in Vietnam. We did indeed duck up. We barely learn about the US. That may be different for other schools, but I know jack shite about the US. What country are you from? Did you know in America you can buy alcohol at gas stations? And you can buy guns at Walmart? If they don't teach you that in school, you aren't learning the essential American values. I didn't do history in 11 or 12, so really ground level shite. The US exists. Washington was this guy. They got independence from the UK. The Oregon Trail had all the dysentery. WW12. And Vietnam happened. JFK was a dude. Armstrong went on a road trip for a few days. Those cowboy and Indian movies. Those Indians were probably not treated super well. It wasn't, realistically, until the internet and facts on demand that my history knowledge increased. From the game, of course. That's actually pretty accurate to what most Americans learn in school too. Just add in the Civil War, and then some extras depending on the teacher or the school. Like we got some tidbits about pre-revolutionary wars in the US colonies, and the Spanish-American War, and for some unknown reason we spent like 5 months on the Transcontinental Railroad. And then your state will throw in some state history that literally nobody outside your state knows. But yeah, pretty accurate. Almost nothing. We founded it. We left. You helped out in WW2 and MLK was a top bloke. That's about it. Chinese mainland are here. A lot. Though most of these were covered in very general terms. How much you needed to learn also depended on whether you choose arts and humanities or science for university entrance exam. My Chinese high school education stopped after 10th grade, so these are not all. But from my memories, we learned about Columbus, discovery, Mayflower and Protestants, Boston Tea Party and the founding of US, American Civil War, and then the Great Depression and Roosevelt's New Deal. U.S is also mentioned, but not mainly discussed when learning about the colonialization of parts of China. Especially their military involvement during the Boxer Revolution, and then the World War II, forming of United Nations, Korean Wars and briefly about Cold War. Also, we needed to learn about Nixon, because of the ping-pong diplomacy between him and Mao. In politics class we also needed to learn about the division of power in US Constitution. Thanks for my first Reddit gold. Stranger. I'm surprised you learned that much about US history. To be honest, sounds pretty comprehensive. In India, all they taught me about USA was discovered in search of India by Christopher Columbus. Indian here. That's exactly the only thing I learned in school. In geography, I think they talk about Rockies for a line or two. That they invaded my country. Make a guess where I live. Edit. I'm from Mexico. Sorry for the late reply. Here's my question: what do American schools teach about the history of other countries? Well, most of get a course called World History. Chapters on Greece and Rome and Persia I remember. Basics on China, Russian Empire, Holy Roman Empire. Mostly really basic stuff about how modern nations came about. Although I do remember getting a really thorough class about the European conquest of the Americas during grade school for some reason. We learned about the different conquistadors, a bit horrifying for children, and had to do quizzes filing out a map of which country claimed which part of the Americas, and why different countries speak Spanish, Portuguese, etc. Also we memorized a bunch about the travels of Marco Polo sort of randomly. Honestly, not a lot. The 1776 revolution is like an intro to our massive chapter about the French Revolution. And that's pretty much it. I mean, we learn about the World Wars and the Cold War, but we never learned about the Civil War and stuff. Canada here. A. War of 1812. The fact that Lincoln considered invasion after the Civil War. WWI and WWII. Cold War. I live in France, and in history/geography class which are taught by a single teacher, the big battles of the USA during WW2, Pearl Harbor, Midway, and June 6, 1944. Total War. They also teach about the Americanization of the world, hard and soft power, globalization, and the Cold War/Middle East era. And in English class we learn about more cultural and sometimes political stuff related either mostly on US or on England depending on the teacher. The problem is that the teachers are often from left political views and assume it's the obviously right way. Chilean here. There was a dictatorship in the 70s and 80s and the US financed a lot. The CIA was also involved in the torturing of people and killings. And of course covering the obvious human rights violation in my country. Edit. Edit 2. This might came out as passive aggressive. But it was a genuine maybe, because I'm not American, and I really don't know if they teach it, haha. But according to most responses it's not taught in many places and a lot of people don't know about the US being involved in it. They don't, but we all pretty much figure it out by ourselves by our teens or 20s, so take that how you will. We covered the 20s and the US in history. That's it. Any idea why the 20s in particular? Was it the huge financial boom or the major bust at the end? We watched Saving Private Ryan and The Hunt for the Red October. That's all I remember. Later on I read about all the stuff the CIA did in Latin America and a podcast on Chiquita. As a Latino, that made my blood boil and totally changed my perception of the United States, corporations, and the CIA. Check out the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman if you can get your hands on it. Scary stuff. They just bring up the school shootings anytime we try and complain about shite. Things like mountains, lakes, rivers, mineral resources, export and import goods, etc. We had to learn those basic data about almost all countries in the world. Sounds like a plot to eventually take over countries with the best mineral/resource wealth/us. I'm Irish and here we are taught about the Civil War, their involvement in WW2, and how they accepted immigration like during the Irish diaspora and the civil rights movements as well as the Vietnam War. Well, general geography and stuff sums up history about revolution and purchases here, and the numerous war mentioned in a paragraph or two from US Civil War to Gulf War. Also stuff about how were the allies in WW2 they aid us in the 1950s and 1960s. Often cutting diplomatic ties with us thanks Nixon/Carter. They bought us from a 333-year colonization from Spain to give us freedom, but exploited us for another 100 or so years. Philippines? Nothing that I remember here in Romania. In Brazil we commonly study what led the US to become independent, but not the war itself. WW1, WW2, the 29 crisis and what you guys did and do in Middle East. I'm in England and we aren't taught much at all about the US. What we were taught was in GCSE about the colonization and the removal and murders of Native Americans, however it was very brief. I think Americans tend to forget that the history of the USA itself is so brief compared to most of the rest of the world that we don't really care. Not much at all. Here in Brazil they teach about the American Revolution and a little bit about the independence process, but the topic that they teach in most details is the Cold War. Mostly because the US basically imposing dictatorships all over Latin America after Cuba, including Brazil. I'm Australian. Never taught anything American related. Basically all we hear about the US in school is how much they go to war everywhere and that their only loss was Vietnam, where they were being absolutely brutal to innocent people. They teach us a lot about the political side of things and how the system needs improvement as well as a little bit about the economy and the global trade. Most of the negative stuff I hear about the US comes from the news. From Australia BTW. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more dank curated content from Crosspostable Reddit.